Good evening, folks. Thanks for joining us for our second parent forum. I'm Andy Durstein, and clinical director and therapist at Onward, and I'm joined by Jackie Roberge, who is our other full-time therapist at Onward. So last week we started with a presentation of acceptance and commitment therapy, and we presented the matrix, which is a format to apply it. And so this week we're going to talk more about the essential components of ACT through the use of the Hexaflex. Jackie has prepared a video, and so we're going to start with about a 7-minute video, and then we'll come back and talk more about it. So, Austin, roll tape.
Hello, Onward families, and welcome to the next video in our series on acceptance and commitment therapy, the main modality that we use here at Onward Transitions. My name is Jackie Roberge, and I'm a clinician. Last week, if you joined us, Andy and I taught you about the ACT matrix, which is one of the main tools that we utilize here at Onward with our members. To review, the aim of ACT is to create a rich, full, and meaningful life while accepting the discomfort, challenges, and frankly pain that inevitably comes with it. This week, we're going to talk about the ACT Hexaflex. The 6 core processes of ACT make up the Hexaflex. These core processes are contact with the present moment, values, committed action, self as context, diffusion, and acceptance. All of these processes contribute to the desired outcome of ACT, which is psychological flexibility. It's important to note that there is no particular order or formula to go about achieving psychological flexibility. Each of these components is just as important as the other. The left side of the Hexaflex focuses on the tools needed for mindfulness and acceptance, while the right side focuses on the commitment and behavioral change processes. For the sake of breaking these terms down a step further, I'm going to go clockwise around the Hexaflex. Let's start with contact with the present moment. Simply put, be in the now. Consciously connecting and engaging in whatever is happening in the present moment. The opposite end of the spectrum of this process would be making decisions or living in the perceived past or the feared future. This is a limited approach to self-knowledge and awareness. Any mindfulness practice can contribute to being present in the current moment. My favorite easy way of doing so is, what does the bottom of your left foot feel like right now? No matter what you were doing, if you thought about what the bottom of your foot felt like, you became rooted in the present moment. The ACT process that you're probably going to hear us refer to the most here at Onward Transitions is values. Who or what is important to you? What brings meaning to your life? Understanding your values is the foundation for living a healthy and meaningful life. There is an important distinction to be made between values and goals. And sometimes I think they're used interchangeably, so I just want to make sure that I make that distinction for you here today. So a goal is a set destination. Once you achieve it, you've done it. A value is a direction in which we choose to move our lives. So we can strive towards it. We don't ever actually quite arrive there. It's just something that guides our choices and our behaviors. So for example, say we value social connection. Something that we may choose to do is we may choose to go to a pottery class so that we can be around people who enjoy the same things that we do. Going to that pottery class is a goal, but going around and being around people that we might be able to make connections with, that's moving towards our values. Going to that pottery class isn't going to achieve that. It's just going to help us move in that direction. Committed action is simply doing what it takes, making deliberate choices and taking effective steps guided by our values, even if it brings up pain and discomfort. This involves making conscious choices and understanding the underlying drivers of our choices. The opposite of committed action is unworkable action. This includes actions that are impulsive, reactive, or automatic, as opposed to mindful, considered, and purposeful. Committed action is motivated by values to overcome avoidance, inaction, or procrastination. In the ACT model, committed actions are the foundations for improving the quality of life. Self as context can also be known as pure awareness. We here at Onward Transitions simply like to refer to it as noticing. If you noticed, Andy and I utilized this term a lot last week when referring to the ACT matrix. It really is the underlying component of taking a step back and understanding what is happening in our daily lives and why we're making the choices that we are. Self as context looks at two parts of the mind. It looks at the thinking self, which stems from language and our daily narrative, and the observing self, which takes a step back, distances ourselves from our thoughts, and simply realizes that we are a human being experiencing these things. For example, say your member's having a difficult time calling their boss because they've been late for work a whole lot. They may start to spiral, and they may start having some thoughts of worthlessness. So they're thinking, I am worthless. The thinking self, the language part of our brain, might treat that thought as fact. The observing self, who takes consideration of self as context, takes a step back, realizes that worthless is just a thought we're having about the experience in our lives, an okay thought that we're having, and doesn't allow that thought or that feeling to define who we are as a person. So diffusion is another tool that we can utilize to kind of detach from our thoughts. So when we're in a state of diffusion, we're noticing thoughts for exactly what they are. They're words or images just kind of running around in our brain. In a state of fusion, we're unable to do that. We're so caught up in all of those words and pictures that we lose contact with direct experience. The big emphasis here is on the way that we language things to ourselves. And mindfulness can be a shuttle between the two worlds of direct experience and language. So I think I am worthless, or I notice that I am feeling worthless, is enough language to take yourself from I am worthless, which is a fact and you can't really move anywhere with that, to I'm a person experiencing this thought or this feeling. Acceptance is pretty much what it sounds like. It's accepting whatever comes our way, whether that's a painful experience, a difficult thought or emotion, or something that feels really wonderful, like happiness or joy. It's just allowing whatever comes our way to be and just accepting that it's there and that it exists. The opposite of acceptance is experiential avoidance. So those are all of those thoughts and behaviors that we engage in to not experience those things or to not just allow them be what they are. So we try to run, we try to escape, we try to avoid. All right, that was a lot of information to digest. Our main hope is that you've gained some familiarity with these core processes and feel a little bit more comfortable discussing these concepts with us or with your young adults. Thank you for joining us, and Andy and I will see you next week where we review some of the stuff about the Hexaflex and discuss how it interacts with the ACT matrix.
We're back. I forgot to mention, if anyone has any questions, you can email them into us and we'll try and respond. So we're now going to connect the essential elements to the matrix. So I'm going to turn this over to Jackie.
Okay, so if we are looking at the matrix that we looked at the other week, I'm going to go through the processes of ACT the same way that I did in that video, so in the same order. Contact with the present moment, that is the y-axis of the matrix. So the further up you go, the more mindful you are, the more present in your body. Values, this one's super obvious, bottom right quadrant, who or what is important to you, that is where they go. So committed action, top right, those are the behaviors to move towards values. Noticing is that big circle right in the middle, that's self as context. And diffusion isn't necessarily a spot on the matrix, but it is the process of writing down the thoughts and feelings in the bottom left quadrant that takes you a little bit away from the thoughts as facts. So it gives a little bit of distance. So that's diffusion. And then acceptance is the bottom left quadrant and either the top left or the top right happening at the same time. So discomfort and committed action, or discomfort and the behaviors to quiet down those thoughts and feelings. Just accepting that they exist and allowing them to be there. So next, we are going to give some examples that either we've experienced here at Onward or that are just common examples of some of these processes. Andy?
So as you well know, many of the members that come to work with us experience significant levels of anxiety. And that anxiety can take many forms. It's not just the emotion or the physiological experience. It also affects thinking and the way people look at things. So this is a particularly effective means of helping people manage their anxiety. So when we think about present moment, one of the things that happens for many of our members is there's various terms for this that they use, but they get caught up in worrying about the future. So future tripping or worst case scenario thinking or catastrophic thinking. And so that way of thinking, that looking to the future with sort of what could go wrong, everything could go wrong, feeds the anxiety. So it's sort of a perpetual motion machine. One of the reasons that it is so important to bring them back to the present moment. This is where you are now. That anxiety you're experiencing right now is actually connected to the fact that you're thinking about the future in these sort of catastrophic ways, and that can be very limiting, very self-limiting. They can also get caught up in ruminating about the past, getting stuck on past events that somehow feel similar to something they're contemplating now. You know, maybe it's school, maybe it's applying for a job, maybe it's walking up to a girl and talking to her, at a pub. We hear all of these. And so you can get stuck in the future, you can get stuck in the past. There could be a lot of what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? And they can get caught up in that overthinking or analysis paralysis. And so this is one of the reasons that it is so important to bring them back to the present moment, because right here in the present is the only time you can do anything really. If you can't go back and change the past, you can't assure the outcome in the future. You can only act in the present. Values we talked a lot about last week, but the common values that we hear from our members are things like social connections, independence, family, kindness, being genuine, my friends, and learning. So those are the important values that they identify. And from there, we work with them to start to develop the purposeful, committed actions to help them move towards those goals, knowing that it's going to be at times difficult for them. And every one of our members identifies social connections as an important value, and nearly every one of them right now experiences social anxiety. So it's not as if by having social anxiety, I don't want social connections. It's the exact opposite. But it's a real difficult struggle to get there. And so we try and help them work through that. The committed actions are the steps that they take to move towards that. So as Jackie stated in the video, going out, joining a club, making connections, even though it's going to be difficult and bring up some difficult feelings. The self as context part, this has to do with language. This has to do with the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And, this is connected to present moment, that, we are not the sum total of the stories that we have told ourselves about ourselves for the last however many years. There's a core part of ourselves that have been there since the day we were born. And that authentic, genuine self is still there. And it's not based on language. It's based on who we are, on what we've experienced, the connections that we've made with people. And so we really try and encourage people to make that shift away from the language that they've used to describe themselves to really thinking about themselves in a different sort of way. I did a webinar a couple of months ago with someone who was presenting ACT, and he was speaking about the power of language to influence us. And he did an exercise where he held up his hand like this with nothing in it and said he had a lemon in his hand and described the lemon in detail and described cutting it in half and the juice flowing down his hand, and et cetera, et cetera. And everyone watching this presentation salivated. And it was based strictly on the language. There was no real lemon there. So we tell ourselves stories that have no basis in fact, but they're still just as powerful and just as believable. And really have to work to learn to challenge that. This is that idea of treating thoughts as facts. Just because you had the thought doesn't mean it's reality. So we really work to help folks challenge that. And then the diffusion is trying to put a little distance between those thoughts that we have about ourselves. So if the thought is I'm no good at basketball, and therefore that shuts me down from playing basketball, to be able to again use the noticing. I'm noticing that I'm having that negative thought about basketball, or I'm noticing that I'm thinking I'm not good at basketball. So it at least keeps open the possibility that, all right, noticing I'm having this, maybe I could be okay at basketball if I practice, versus this absolute statement that I'm no good at basketball, and there's a finality to that as if it's sort of my own destiny. So, those are the kinds of things that we hear. And our members have all kinds of challenges that they get stuck in, particularly with the language that they've used to describe themselves, their past, and their experience. Jackie, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think I want to add a little bit more to acceptance, because I feel like it sounds super easy and like a really easy concept to grasp, but it's really hard sometimes, right? We don't like those icky thoughts and feelings. We want to avoid them. Sometimes we try to control them. So I know that I spend a lot of time with my members around accepting their thoughts, being curious about their feelings, and creating space for them, because our feelings don't just go away. We kind of have to ride them out. Sometimes I describe it as like the light at the end of the tunnel, right? You start the feeling when you enter the tunnel, you have to get all the way through the other side in order to move forward. So if you're living on the left side of the matrix, you might get temporary relief by some of those behaviors, but those thoughts and feelings are going to creep back up if you don't allow them to kind of just be what they are. So acceptance is really important, sometimes easier said than done.
Okay, so we're gonna make up an example here and sort of see how the different elements of the Hexaflex apply here. So, and I guess I'm not making this up, because this is the kind of stuff that we hear pretty frequently. And in this case, it would be something along the lines of, I've never been any good at school. And so, first of all, it's important to establish that, is learning a value to you? Is that important? Is that a value? Because if it's not, then you're pursuing a goal that really isn't value driven. You're going to be less motivated to really work to achieve that. Sometimes the question is, whose value is this? Are you pursuing this because it's important to you? Or are you pursuing this because you think it's important to someone else? But so let's say we establish that learning is an important value, and so the goal in this case is to get back to college. We frequently have members who have tried a couple of years of college, and for whatever reason, really struggled. Maybe ended up taking a medical leave, maybe ended up dropping out, maybe haven't been back to school for a couple of years, but they still value that. But they're still stuck with this language of, I've never been any good at school. So if we start to apply these different pieces, the diffusion is the noticing. Okay, I'm noticing that I'm having that thought, that I'm thinking I'm no good at school. So it just creates that 1 degree of separation. But sometimes that's enough to get the wheel turning in the right direction again. And then the self as context, using language to define ourselves. And in this case, it's negative language, and it's absolute. I've never been any good. So helping them to language that, and to think of themselves, again, not by the way they define themselves with words, but in a sense, open themselves up to possibilities. Could maybe give this a try. School used to be harder for me when I was younger. I've gotten better at things as I've gotten older. So maybe there is a possibility here. I'm pretty good at lots of other things. So again, not just defining themselves in that language, but looking at themselves as a whole person and creating some options and possibilities again. And again, recognizing that this is a thought, not a fact. This isn't an evidence-based statement that I've never been any good at school. School has been hard, and I think we have to acknowledge and honor that with many of our members, that they've had a difficult time at school, whether it's because of anxiety or just neuroatypicality or learning styles. School for many of our members has been difficult. That doesn't mean they're not any good at it. It means it's been a difficult experience for them. And then the present moment is, again, don't let the past define who you are. Those difficulties that you had in school in the past are real, and you may have some challenges now, but that doesn't mean it's not a possibility. It doesn't mean you're not in a different place at 23 than you were at 14, for example. So that's bringing them back to the present. And what are the possibilities now? And then, the acceptance is, okay, so I'm going to take this committed action and I'm going to enroll for a couple of classes at the University of Southern Maine. And as I'm doing that, it brings up a lot of these yucky and those yucky feelings I want to shut down, but I'm trying to work with the acceptance that, okay, I'm going to have these difficult feelings and I'm going to keep moving forward with those committed actions. And talking with your therapist, languaging it, journaling, all those kinds of things are the ways that we help them keep noticing and keep moving, finding that balance between mind and body. So they're not just getting stuck in their heads with it all. So that would be a fairly common example. And, whether it's I'm no good at school, or I've never been able to hold down a job, or I can't talk to people, all of those sorts of absolute statements we work with pretty regularly and utilize those essential components.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important also to understand that when we are fused with our thoughts, we're left with one option, right? Which is that thought is reality and that's it. There's no real wiggle room there. By diffusing from our thoughts and noticing self as context, we're a human being experiencing something, it opens up more options. We have availability of committed actions that we can move towards. We don't have to live on that top left side, just kind of trying to quiet down the ick. So that's another really cool way that the matrix opens up your options. Just by writing down your thoughts and feelings, you're taking that step to diffuse from them.
Okay. So I think that about covers the topic for this evening. And again, if you have questions, please email them in. Even if we're done with the webinar, email them in and we can put them on the forum and respond to them there. So we'll plan to be back again in 2 weeks. We may be making a little bit of a shift in the evenings, but for now, we're going to stick with Tuesdays. And so thank you for joining us, and be well and stay healthy.